Well, for those of you who don't know, I'm Father Terry Moran. I'm the director of the Office of Peace, Justice, and Ecological Integrity for the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth in Convent Station, New Jersey. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this second session of our series on food and faith that is co-sponsored by my office and by the equivalent office and our cousins, the Sisters of Charity of New York across the river. And Sister Carol D'Angelo is the director of that office. As many of you probably know, our two congregations had a joint assembly back in April. And one of the decisions was that we would continue to live into the vision of Laudato Si, with an emphasis on reducing our carbon footprint by a focus on our food print. So Sister Carol and I planned this four-part series to educate our sisters and associates and other interested people on issues of food justice. We're so pleased tonight to have joining us Kelly Moltzen, who will be talking on food print and the spirituality of food. As I said, the session will be recorded, and I'll send the link out. You'll get it by the same way you got the notice for this series. Also, please plan to join us for our next session, the first Monday of November, November 6th, when we'll be joined by Religious of the Sacred Heart, Sister Mary McCann, who is author of this wonderful book, The Meal That Reconnects, Eucharistic Eating and the Global Food Crisis. Mary will talk to us about the contribution of plant-based eating to greater food justice. So this evening, Kelly will talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions and comments. So I now turn it over to Sister Carol to introduce Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you. So Kelly, we are just so happy that you are here with us, and thank you for accepting the invitation. Kelly's experiences and insights on faith, food justice, and the spirituality of food, I think, will help us respond to the call of Laudato Si, especially this focus we have on food print. Kelly's resume is very long and impressive, and so it's difficult for me to decide what to highlight. So I was glad when Kelly sent me a short bio, and I'm going to read you that short bio in a few minutes. But first, I thought I'd offer a more personal introduction. I met Kelly, many years ago, probably around 12, 13 years ago, at a faith leaders event on food justice. Kelly was one of the presenters. I was so impressed with Kelly and how she talked about food, faith, and the food system that I reached out afterwards to her, and we continued the conversation. Her youth, because she was very young at the time, still is, but very young at the time, Kelly's experience from working with people in the food deserts in the Bronx, and her vision of how food justice and food security relate to our faith, it really impressed me. Kelly's passion and commitment remain as strong today as they were when I first met her. And over the years, Kelly's been a colleague, though sometimes really from a distance, especially when she moved to Washington, D.C. But because of our involvements with the Laudato Si movement, Green Faith, and the Franciscan Action Network, we've kind of crossed paths over the years. So now for Kelly's short bio. Kelly Moltzen is a co-founder and convener of the Interfaith Public Health Network, which helps organizations and faith communities to create impactful relationships to advance public health. She is a registered dietitian, has her master's of public health, and is a member of the USA Secular Franciscan Order. Kelly was a 2022 Rockefeller Acumen Food Systems Fellow, her 2021 Rockefeller Food System Vision Prize proposal, Faith Communities Leading the Way Towards Healthy, Sustainable Food Systems, reached the semifinalist stage. She is a steering committee member of the Center for Earth Ethics, Faith and Food Coalition, and she was named to Hunter College's New York City Food Policy Center 40 Under 40 class of 2020. Kelly has worked to address health disparities in the Bronx with Bronx Health Reach for over 13 years. She is also currently supporting the Chief Impact and Sustainability Office of Church World Service as a consultant. So Kelly, thank you for being here and taking time out of your busy schedule to share your faith, your vision, and dream for a sustainable, just, accessible, affordable, healthy food system for all. So Kelly, thank you. And we thought it would be good if Kelly began and leading us in the prayer. So Kelly will do the opening prayer also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Carol and Father Terry. So I will start off with this opening prayer that we have here, which I found and I thought was relevant based on the Care for Creation theme. So let us center ourselves. God of the universe, we thank you for your many good gifts, for the beauty of creation and its rich and varied fruits, for clean water and fresh air, for food and shelter, animals and plants. Forgive us for the times we have taken the earth's resources for granted and wasted what you have given us. Transform our hearts and minds so that we would learn to care and share, to touch the earth with gentleness and with love, respecting all living things. We pray for all those who suffer as a result of our waste, greed, and indifference. And we pray that the day would come when everyone has enough food and clean water. Help us to respect the rights of all people and all species, and help us to willingly share your gifts today and always. Amen. So I was going back and forth. I think this title of the talk was supposed to be a Foodprint and the Spirituality of Food. And then I was listening to the talk from Jim Ennis that you had last month. And so you put food justice in there too. And I think it's just as well that we add food justice in, because I don't think we can talk about the spirituality of food without also talking about food justice. And also my background is largely in working with communities in the Bronx, which is around, the food justice side of it. And I think when people are really struggling so much to find, fresh, healthy, affordable food, they're not also able to think about the additional layer of the environmental impact of their food. So, just keeping that in mind as I go through the talk for today. So when I think of the spirituality of food, I think of the way that Thich Nhat Hanh spoke about food. So he says, this piece of bread is the body of the whole cosmos. If Christ is the body of God, which he is, then the bread he offers is also the body of the cosmos. Look deeply and you notice the sunshine in the bread, the blue sky in the bread, the cloud and the great earth in the bread. Can you tell me what is not in a piece of bread? The whole cosmos has come together in order to bring you this piece of bread. You eat it in such a way that you come alive, truly alive. So this to me is a really clear articulation of how everything is interconnected and begs the question, what was it that Jesus was really telling us about the characteristics of the cosmic Christ when he shared a meal and broke bread with his disciples? At least that's what I think about when I see this quote. And if the whole cosmos is in each piece of bread, then the system that brought that piece of bread into existence is vastly intricate, with lots of opportunities for injustice and ecological destruction to crop up along the way. So I know that you're having Mary McCann speak on her book, The Meal That Reconnects Eucharistic Eating in the Global Food Crisis, in the next talk. But I recently read the book, and I'm deeply interested in the connections that can be made here. So while I know she won't be speaking until next month, I think it's helpful to frame the conversation about the implications of our food system and the spirituality of food in the context of the Eucharist and the common good, which she speaks about in her book. The common table created by Jesus' meals, which are at the heart of the Eucharist, were a shared egalitarianism of spiritual and material resources, rooted in a deep respect for the land and a realization that its abundance belongs to all, rather than almsgiving or charity, which reinforces social and economic divisions rather than making people equal. This shared meal should speak of the common good, for at the table, everything that creates the world is present. Economics, politics, power, the potential for rivalry and competition, bonds among friends, and boundaries against enemies. So a question for us is, are we keeping in mind the balancing respect for humanity, especially the most vulnerable, and respect for the earth, as we choose and harvest the foods that nourish us? So where are the different places that we can have an impact on the food system? Globally, an estimated 26% of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions are said to come from the total food supply chain. How and what we eat have significant environmental impacts as well as social impacts. So starting with production, which is the top of this circle here, government subsidies disproportionately benefit large multinational corporations that produce food industrially instead of agroecologically, and small farmers suffer as a result. Industrial agriculture prioritizes monocropped fields, which require chemical fertilizers and pesticides that run off into soil and waterways. Confined animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, or factory farms, result in excess animal waste that pollutes soil, water, air, and impacting those who live nearby, and also contaminating the nearby produce farms with toxins that are dangerous to human health. The way we produce food contributes to global climate change as well, and the effects of which exert a huge impact on the food system. Drought, flood, extreme heat, and extreme cold are also affecting crops. There are also social impacts related to how food is produced. So food production often relies on human labor that pays poorly, is often unregulated, and falls to those who have few other choices. Monocrops by transnational companies have led to rural impoverishment, increased debt, social inequality, and the displacement of vast numbers of peasant farmers, as the wealth goes to the top of these companies rather than the people at the bottom, the peasant farmers. Industrially produced food is also not as nutritious as food produced agroecologically. Governments are spending billions of dollars to subsidize monocrop agriculture, which is failing nutritionally, and so the same governments are forced to spend billions of dollars more to subsidize nutrition in the form of fortification, supplementation, and medicines. Meanwhile, the foods that are native to an area would typically have the nutrients needed by the population. In Malawi, for example, they face deficiencies in most micronutrients, such as vitamin A and iron, yet the country is rich in natural sources of these nutrients in forms of fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, oilseeds, fats, and food from animals. So regenerative practices invest in the natural environment rather than depleting it, building soil health, clean water systems, and biodiversity. Truly sustainable food must be produced in a way that takes into account not only the environment, but also people. That includes the people who grow, harvest, and process our food, and the people who live in and around farms, and everyone who eats. So moving on to processing, we can ask, is the food processed minimally, such as cut vegetables, or is it ultra-processed with more ingredients that we can count or pronounce? And a lot of industrial processes that go into creating that food. Is a lot of packaging used? For distribution, we can ask, is food distributed locally and regionally? So we are consuming food that was produced nearby, or is it distributed long distances across the country or even internationally? Longer distances increase a food's carbon footprint, and so it is not as fresh as if it were distributed a short distance, and increases the number of middlemen involved in getting our food to us. Also, is the food distributed in vehicles that contribute to environmental pollution or in environmentally friendly ways? Is there a food hub infrastructure in place that would allow for a collective buying group to be able to purchase fresh food in bulk and be able to distribute it to individual stores for them to sell at more affordable prices? Regarding access, food injustices exist regarding who has access to enough food to eat, and then who has access to that food that is sustainably produced as well as nourishing and healthy. We can ask, are there adequate farmers markets or grocery stores in a community? Is that food affordable? Or is a community a food swamp filled with food that is unhealthy and ultra-processed? What kind of food is accessible in schools, hospitals, faith-based organizations, senior centers, and prisons? Do procurement laws incentivize them to purchase healthy foods produced in ways that honor local economies, valued workforce, nutrition, animal welfare, and environmental sustainability, known as the Good Food Purchasing Program? Or are they just foods that they can get at the lowest cost? Moving to consumption, we can ask, are people informed of the nutritional quality of food enough to make informed choices? Or are they unfairly marketed to with advertisements for unhealthy foods and beverages? Are people consuming plant-forward diets that center foods that have a lower carbon footprint, such as produce, beans, and grains? Or are they consuming diets that are heavy on meat and dairy? Do people know how to prepare the foods they have access to? And also, many people in low-income communities either are not aware of the environmental impact of their food choices or don't have the money or time to make different decisions, even if they were aware, since unhealthy and ultra-processed foods are so cheap and take more time to prepare. And the fresh foods take more time to prepare. So those fresh foods, are more difficult for people to choose. And people in low-income communities often have to work several jobs to make ends meet. And then for waste recovery, we can ask, do large institutions rescue food, or do they have policies against rescuing food? Do people know how to compost? And do governmental programs make composting services available and accessible? We also need national research-informed standards for expiration dates on food products, so good quality food is not wasted. So in summary, this industrial food system, some important facets to keep in mind are that it maximizes production and reduces cost, functions much like factories. They're built for scale and efficiency, and while they often result in food that are less expensive for the consumer, it also creates externalized costs, paying for environmental cleanup or public health impacts that must be absorbed by governments and taxpayers. Farms under the system have become larger and larger, and food processing facilities have become increasingly more consolidated, with many industries controlled by just a few companies. Life on a family farm has become more challenging and less financially viable, which has been devastating for farmers who have lost their livelihoods. It has also been terrible for their rural communities, where the lion's share of profits no longer remains local and instead goes to large conglomerates. And land degradation caused by these industrial processes are known to have serious social, cultural, and health effects for humans, including malnutrition, disease, forced migration, and social conflicts. It is said that drought and fertile land loss was one of the reasons for the wars in Sudan and Syria. 43% of the world's population lives in regions affected by land degradation, and by 2050, reports estimate that 4 billion people will be living in lands unable to support farming and other agricultural needs. Not only are industrial agricultural practices causing severe land degradation, but it has also not been shown to address food insecurity, as there are still around 815 million undernourished people worldwide. And food systems from industrial agriculture are failing the food producers themselves. With each cycle of monocropping, there is lower crop yield, which leads to increased use of fertilizers and pesticides, which leads to increased dependency on the harmful chemicals, which leads to depleted food nutrition and human exposure to toxic chemicals. So it's a really awful cycle. And the system also has detrimental impacts on public health. So with overcrowding on factory farms, the ammonia-filled hen houses where eggs are produced by the tens of thousands. There's monocropped fields of corn, soy, and produce that rely heavily on synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. And pesticides have been linked to multiple health problems, including neurological and hormonal system disorders, birth defects, cancer, and other diseases. And some of these public health threats are a result of environmental degradation to our air, water, and soil from animal waste and agricultural runoff. And some threats are because this industrial model of farming provides an excess of inexpensive, low-nutrient food, which contributes to diet-related diseases. And for the farm and factory laborers who maintain these farms, there's an increased risk of respiratory problems, workplace injuries, and certain cancers. And there's grave concern that the overuse of antibiotics on farms has increased the threat of antibiotic resistance and infectious disease transmission. So the food system that we have in the world today is obviously problematic for environmental sustainability and human health. The Eat Lancet Commission on Food, Planet, Health brought together 37 world-leading scientists from across the globe to answer this question: can we feed a future population of 10 billion people a healthy diet within planetary boundaries? The report that they published in 2019 says transformation to healthy diets by 2050 will require substantial dietary shifts. Global consumption of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes will have to double, and consumption of foods such as red meat and sugar will have to be reduced by more than 50%. A diet rich in plant-based foods and with fewer animal-sourced foods confers both improved health and environmental benefits. And the Eat Lancet report looks at the boundaries that will meet the needs of both human and environmental health. So the first target is on healthy diets. And the recommended diet is one composed of half vegetables, as you can see on the left, some whole grains, which is here in the yellow, plant-sourced protein, including legumes and nuts, unsaturated plant oils, and only small amounts of dairy, animal-sourced protein, starchy vegetables, and added sugar, which are these small ones here. And in North America, we are eating way beyond the limits of what is sustainable for planetary health. 638% of red meat, which is here in the red, over twice the amounts of eggs and poultry, and then as well as too much dairy and starchy vegetables. So these are all above the circle of what's 100% of the planetary boundary. We do not eat enough fish, vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, or nuts, which are these small pieces in the middle of the circle. So the next target is sustainable food production. And this visual explains how a combination of actions is needed in order for food production and consumption to change to within the planetary boundary. The aim is to reduce the impact on the environment to within the uncertainty risk, which is the gray shading, or the boundary, which is the dashed line here. A single change, such as dietary shifts, improved production practices, or reducing food loss and waste, which are represented by the red, yellow, and blue here, are not enough individually. We need a combination of these changes, which is the sea blue, which are the smaller pieces here, to limit greenhouse gas emissions and transition our food system to become more sustainable. We also cannot achieve sustainable food systems with the levels of biodiversity loss, which are projected to occur by 2050. That needs to be drastically reduced through ambitious action. See, that's a very big component of this diagram here. So in the past couple of years, there's also been more research on the environmental impacts of ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods are not real foods, and they're made from formulated ingredients, mostly for exclusive industrial use. They are formulas of food substances modified by a chemical process and packaged into a ready-to-consume addictive food and drink product using added coloring, flavors, emulsifiers, and many other additives being almost exclusively produced by large transnational corporations. They are highly profitable, designed to have a long shelf life, convenient, extremely appealing, and unhealthy. Ultra-processed food products already make up more than half of the energy intake in most countries around the world. Ultra-processed foods are also largely produced through industrial farming, which involves monocropping, financialization of food systems, and heavy use of fertilizers and pesticides. Ultra-processed foods, or UPFs they're also called, are generally manufactured with the use of ingredients extracted from a few high-yielding monocrop plant species, including wheat, corn, soy, and oilseed crops. 90% of energy intake for all human food consumption comes from only 15 crop plants, mostly used for the production of these UPFs. And many UPFs contain oils made from soy and palm, which have considerable negative environmental and health effects. However, the environmental impacts of these foods go far beyond the primary resources used in the production of ingredients. The production of these foods use vast amounts of agricultural commodities and therefore use large quantities of water, land, energy, herbicides, and fertilizers, which cause environmental degradation and the release of greenhouse gases. This has more of the same consequences that I spoke about earlier. And studies have shown that many people who have a UPF diet have pesticides present in their system as well. It is crucial that environmental considerations of food diets include the overall impact of UPF foods from farm to plate, including all stages of farming, processing, packaging, and distribution. Food systems are harming both the environment and the people who depend on it. So this chart is from one of the articles that I found relating to the environmental impacts of these ultra-processed foods. And the light green on the bottom is the least processed, and the higher you go, the more processed it is. So this green on the top is the ultra-processed foods. So that means that it has more of an environmental impact than foods that are less processed. And some people want to know if fake meat products are better. And the reality is that they are not necessarily better for the environment or for human health. If you look at the ingredient list, they are highly processed, which means the system needed to create these products are very resource intensive, and any natural ingredients which they were made of have been processed to such an extent they are going to have a detrimental impact on your health, along with having a lot of calories and fat, including saturated fat. Since in this product, they are using coconut oil, which is one of the only plant foods with saturated fat. Saturated fat is associated with heart disease, and is normally just found in animal products, but they put it in this fake meat product here. And in order to switch to a plant-based diet in a way that is better for human and environmental health, the Sustainable Development Goal 2 Advocacy Hub of the United Nations launched a campaign last year called Beans is How. It's a movement to promote bean consumption globally as a way for consumers to eat more sustainable protein while improving our health and tackle climate change from the dinner table. The tagline is, "We believe we can fix the future with beans," and includes recipes with beans from different cultures, as well as highlights restaurants that are serving more bean-based dishes. So sustainable agriculture is farming that is good. Some of the aspects of it is farming that is good for the environment, animals, and people. It recognizes that the earth needs to be in good health because it must continue to provide for future generations. It uses a whole ecosystem approach, including the well-being of people and animals, community health, ecological health, and soil health. It doesn't rely on adding in external inputs, such as synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. This helps farmers be less reliant on buying things off-farm. It makes use of its own outputs by composting the crop waste, such as stalks and leaves, and applying animal manure as fertilizers onto fields. And a closed-loop cycle that builds soil health, clean water systems, and biodiversity, rather than depleting them. If done right, it can even use those healthy soils to trap carbon, helping to slow climate change. So to create sustainable food systems, we need to consider policy. The Farm Bill, which I know you heard a little bit about last time with Jim Ennis, it governs crop insurance for farmers and sets guidelines for conservation funding and funds various nutrition and hunger programs at the federal level. Cities and states have also started to address food policy, establishing food policy councils or hiring food policy czars to look at how cities and regions feed themselves and how they can keep their inhabitants healthy and increase their access to healthy and affordable food. So a large problem is that the subsidies through the Farm Bill, which is the major package of legislation in the US which governs agricultural policy programs and funding, don't align with the US dietary guidelines. Most Americans don't meet the US dietary guidelines, so changing the Farm Bill subsidies could have a big impact on the nutrition and health of Americans. For the dietary guidelines and the My Plate, which is a visual example of the dietary guidelines, fruits and vegetables make up 50% of the recommendations, versus if you look at the chart on the right, the Farm Bill subsidies, the fruits and vegetables here are only 4% of government subsidies. Most government subsidies go towards livestock and animal feeds, biofuels, industrial purposes, exports, and processed foods. 15% goes to food grain for people and 2% for nuts and seeds. So how can we learn exactly what we need to change about our diet to transition to one that supports our health and environmental sustainability? The World Wildlife Fund Planet-Based Diet Calculator was created to allow users to assess the environmental impacts, including land use, water use, and greenhouse gas emissions, and health impacts of their own weekly diet, and what would happen if everyone in their country ate like them. It can be an important tool for scientists and policymakers to realize the power of shifting consumption patterns in achieving nature and climate goals. And this website at the bottom, planetbaseddiets.panda.org, is where you can find that calculator. Ultimately, I think a good rule of thumb that is using a simple tool such as Oxfam's GROW method. This explains how to eat so that there is enough food for everyone and no one goes hungry. So don't waste food, eat seasonally, eat less meat, support small-scale farmers, and limit how much energy is needed when cooking. Echoing his call in Laudato Si', Pope Francis explained to participants of the European Youth Conference in 2022 how urgent it is to reduce consumption not only of fossil fuels, but of many superfluous things, and he said that in certain parts of the world it would be advisable to consume less meat. So there's this term called reducitarianism, which I really like. And reducitarianism is the practice of eating less meat, so red meat, poultry, and seafood, as well as less dairy and fewer eggs, regardless of the degree or motivation. This concept is appealing because not everyone is willing to follow an all-or-nothing diet. However, reducitarianism is still inclusive of vegans, vegetarians, and anyone else who reduces the amount of animal products in their diet. And this goes hand in hand with an organization called 50 by 40, which is the movement to reduce production and consumption of animal agriculture 50% by 2040 and ensure that 100% of the remaining production is environmentally and socially sustainable. To choose meat products that are grown more sustainably and ethically, look for food labels that signify if animals were certified grass-fed, animal welfare approved, USDA organic, and others. More information about these labels can be found at foodprint.org. So because this talk was on the Foodprint, I did find some information from the website to share with you all today. And all of this goes back to mindful eating. For each step of the food system, there is something we can do to lessen the carbon footprint of our food choices. We can grow our own food and grow food organically. We can choose foods that were grown locally or regionally, and seasonal foods, rather than foods transported far distances to get to us. We can choose foods that are not processed or in packaging whenever possible. And we can eat less meat and conserve energy when cooking, and reduce food waste and compost our food scraps. And just as each of these steps can be done at an individual level, if we want to make changes at a bigger level, we can advocate for changes to be made with organizations at the institutional level, as well as policies to be changed at the governmental level. So there's this quote in the book, Care for Creation, of Franciscan Spirituality of the Earth, that I really like. And it says, eating locally is good for our health and the health of the planet. It is good for local farmers. It builds community, and it contributes significantly to curbing global warming. It is the perfect penitent action, requiring intention and sacrifice on the personal level, offering transformative potential on the societal level, and in the meantime, bringing into our lives many of the spiritual gifts that accompany the penitent life: simplicity, community, humility, and joy. And to go a step further, what if instead of looking at eating locally as having to give something up, for example, we looked at it from a different paradigm, that of recognizing and celebrating the abundance that God has provided for us? What if we looked at the world through the lens of St. Francis of Assisi, who praised God for every element of creation and found joy in biodiversity and nature and the opportunity we have been given to be alive? Something to think about before next month's presentation from Mary McCann on her book, The Meal That Reconnects, is how in our contemporary, I think I have a slide on this, how in our contemporary world, where industrial agriculture has raped the land, depriving uncountable poor ones of livelihood, health, and well-being, and ensuring that wealth continues to accrue to wealth, can Christian Table Fellowship rebuild the human biotic community on principles radically different from those of the surrounding corporate culture? How can we restore the spiritual connection to land that our ancestors had, and how would this help us to transform our food system? So I want to share, sort of to transition a little bit. Sister Carol mentioned earlier that I had submitted this proposal, the faith community is leading the way towards healthy and sustainable food systems. And this is something that I wrote, actually started before the pandemic, but then they gave us extra time during the pandemic to finish it. But it's a 30-year vision for transforming the food system. And we had to pick a particular geographic area to focus on. So I picked the Northeast area of the US. And part of the goal was to prime global food systems leaders for participating in the UN Food Systems Summit in 2021. I found the idea of creating a vision inspirational, as I once heard that vision is the cousin of prayer. And so this proposal, like I said, it focused on the Northeast coast and Mid-Atlantic region. But I think that the ideas that I have shared there can be generalized to other areas as well. The vision is that faith communities will set the example for how to create healthy and sustainable food systems. Growing practices will center regenerative agriculture, increasing food security, and improving resilience in the face of future disasters and climate change. We will build on the motivations of faith communities around equity, health, and environmental sustainability. And the food system will serve to connect people to one another. So to give you a flavor of the different elements of this vision, I have some visuals here to share with you. So the first one is on mapping partners. So the idea is using technology to identify market demand for regionally sourced food and connecting producers and consumers through community-supported agriculture, gathering data about faith communities' capacity to grow, source, refrigerate, aggregate, and distribute food. So with this data, it can better inform how food is being distributed in a region. And the Good Food Purchasing Program, which I mentioned earlier, is a procurement program that centers the value of nutrition, environmental sustainability, local economies, valued workforce, and animal welfare. So we can tap into the potential of religious institutions to adopt procurement practices that meet these values. The next aspect is around training. So retreat centers and colleges and universities can serve as hubs where faith leaders gather to learn food systems information they can bring back to their own congregations. Seminaries can help connect the dots between food, environment, health, racial equity, and faith that is specific to each religious tradition, and provide examples of how individuals and congregations can shift to a more healthy and ecologically sound food system. Land stewardship education and formation can include bioregional ecclesiology and watershed discipleship. People will come to view food as sacred and worthy of time spent consuming mindfully and in the company of others, and work towards the goals of mindful eating for the beloved community, building a racially just and inclusive food system. We would highlight best practices from faith communities and healthcare institution collaborations. Farm immersion opportunities would connect people in urban areas with the source of their food in rural areas, cultivating greater appreciation for local food and the farmers who grow it, as well as fostering community among people of different socioeconomic and racial backgrounds. And the training will also teach how to set up farm share programs and hire coordinators to facilitate congregations' involvement with the regional food system, and how to set sliding scale systems to subsidize the cost of farm shares for those who need it. And more faith communities will place food at the center of the worship table, that's this one, and incorporate liturgy into meals, such as the dinner church movement does in the Protestant tradition. Action and implementation. The training sites themselves will grow food on their campuses, host farmers markets, and maintain collaboration with local communities impacted by food injustice. Faith communities will put into practice what was learned through mapping and training activities, and grow food or partner with a nearby farm and utilize their kitchen space to support the regional food system. If the local farmers are unable to meet the growing demand for their food, the congregations in the region can partner with the regional food hubs to convene listening sessions with farmers and identify how to support the increased demand. And participants would be ready to advocate for needed policy changes within government. We would find ways to protect farmland, provide 0% and low-interest loans to farmers, using underwriting practices that focus on equity and fairness, risk tolerance, nimbleness, and environmental stewardship. We'd support group purchasing and support refugees and immigrants in growing food, and ensure local and regional food business enterprises are aware of how to apply for USDA program funding. Faith communities in one region will work alongside those in other parts of the US in order to influence federal policy. We will advocate for funding to support regional food hubs, certification for small farmers that supports good agricultural practices and regenerative practices, and policies that support economic justice for farm workers, as well as increased regulation of harmful fertilizers and pesticides, reduction of subsidies going towards conventional farming or monocrops, creation of a regenerative farming support payment, a moratorium on large-scale concentrated animal feeding operations, and $100 billion over 10 years to a voluntary buyout program for CAFO owners and to support farmers in transitioning towards pasture-based livestock, growing specialty crops, or organic commodity production. This is all part of a Farm Systems Reform Act that Senator Cory Booker has put forward. And we cultivate the movement for a more local and sustainable food system with politicians so that they are willing and eager to put equity and fairness ahead of corporate profits and shareholder gains. Faith communities will advocate for food retail incentives to be created that encourage consumers to buy local and regional healthy food. Healthcare providers and health insurance companies incentivize participating in fruits and vegetable prescriptions. For food and nutrition education curricula to be incorporated into schools, and limiting the marketing of unhealthful foods and beverages by corporations. So this picture is from a rally that Interfaith Public Health Network was involved in with a campaign to get sugar warning labels in chain restaurants. And for convenings, once faith communities are trained and already implementing some of these initiatives, retreat centers, universities, and institutions will once again be gathering places for food and faith convenings. Funders and elected officials will join together with food advocates, faith-based organizations, and parafaith organizations to discuss challenges faced by the regional food system and opportunities for collaboration. Religious institutions that own land will receive technical assistance regarding farming in partnership with groups such as Catholic Pro-Life, Faith Lands, Good Lands, and Church Lands. We'll have more diversity of farmers owning land. We'll make sure farmers are paid regardless of who is growing the food. Some of the food will likely be enjoyed as part of the community meals that will be prepared on site. These meals are similar to a soup kitchen, but with more socioeconomic diversity among the participants, providing valuable opportunity for people to cross socioeconomic divides and make connections and get to know each other. And communal dinners are already a focal practice in faith-based organizations meeting both spiritual and physical needs through one means. Attendees would be invited to help prepare meals together, learn about the food system and nutrition, and feature possibly unfamiliar and always fresh ingredients, ideally sourced from local farms. Migrants and workers from across the food system would be invited to the table to share their stories, and dialogues will be expanded to include local farmers so that food can be grown in the region that is informed by the cultures of people comprising the community. Faith communities will also be invited to come together in new ways through ecumenical and interfaith collaboration to improve food systems. Regional meals will be organized to introduce members of different congregations and faith traditions, as well as local farmers, to one another. And progress in achieving this regional food system, organized by the faith community, will be documented through the Food and Faith podcast, Food Tank, and other media, especially those widely read by members of faith communities. So in summary, this regional food system, built with the support of faith communities, would increase social equity by giving marginalized communities access to farmland. It would also increase awareness of the importance of investing in food that meets the values of nutrition, environmental sustainability, local economies, valued workforce, and animal welfare. It would give everyone access to local and regional fresh food, mitigating some of the dire rates of disease and poor health outcomes among people of color due to a broken food system. A strong local and regional food system offers a more democratic, empowering, and healthy alternative to our current global model, which wastes energy, pollutes, shows vulnerability in times of crisis, and does not serve individual communities in a caring way. More local responsibility and autonomy in our food system would strengthen community bonds and give people a sense of pride and a place of connection, which is desperately needed. So that's what I have for you today. If you have any questions.
Kelly, thank you so much for that literally breathtaking presentation. You probably need to catch your breath. So comprehensive and also so inspiring, and with your proposal at the last couple of slides. So before we have time for questions and comments, let's just take a moment of silence to let that wonderful information and vision settle inside us and see what it is stirring us to say and to think and to do. Okay. I just have a practical question first. Kelly, would you mind sharing your slides with us?
Sure. Yeah, of course I can do that.
Okay, so if you email them to me, I'll send them out when I send out the video. Thanks very much, because there was so much wonderful material there. So anyone who would like to ask a question or make a comment, I think we're a small enough group that you can just unmute yourself and ask, or if you want, you can use the raise the hand symbol, and I'll call on you. Claire?
Hi, thank you, Terry. I was remembering during COVID, so much of the distribution system was out of whack. And there we found produce farmers were coming directly into inner city neighborhoods with the fresh produce. People were having access to fresh foods directly that they didn't have before. Have we lost a lot of that reconfiguration of the distribution? Have we been able to hold on to some of it? What did we learn? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, the distribution during COVID really, first of all, it showed a vulnerability in our food system because it showed that there was like two different systems of distribution, one for supermarkets and one for restaurants. And the food on the supermarkets was, all running off the shelves, but then nobody was going to the restaurant. So all that food, we're trying to prevent it from being wasted, right? So there was definitely and there wasn't an easy way to get extra food from the restaurants to the supermarket. So, so there's definitely some brokenness in the system. And I think the federal government, they came up with some sort of stopgap measures in the interim to try and increase the access to fresh food for communities. So they did put in place, and this was also, I think, when President Trump was in office, but they created some sort of model that was a temporary program, but I think there are efforts to try and expand some of those. And interestingly, I just read an update. There's a program called Nourish New York that I think was put in place during the pandemic, and the goal for it was to expand, to be extended beyond the pandemic. But there's some issues with the implementation of that. And so in order for a program like that to continue and be extended, they would have to figure out how to address some of those implementation issues. So a lot of these things get caught up in the bureaucracy and the systems, that need to change in order for programs to become more sustainable. So there's definitely efforts to, extend some of those programs beyond the pandemic, but it's not as easy. And the other thing is that everyone had all hands on deck during the pandemic to make sure that food was getting into communities. So there was probably also an element of that people were just more willing to go out of their way to make sure that food was getting into communities because it was like impacting people's lives in a very real way. It was very evident at that point. So hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Carol?
Okay, so Kelly, first of all, you raised a lot of things for me, and I've been thinking about it, but even hearing you speak to the whole fact of a planetary health and how my eating contributes to it or not, or what I can do. So certainly the challenge to eat more healthily, that's a big challenge. But I'm just wondering, you've been at this for quite a while, and you laid out a vision for us. And so maybe on a more personal basis, have you seen some of elements of this vision coming together, and maybe where you could give us one or two examples, kind of give us signs of hope? I would be really interested, just because you've been in this for such a long time and you've been working with the fellowship, I forget the correct names, but where have you seen some signs of hope in terms of people connecting eating with spirituality, and also some of the elements of the vision that you laid out where it actually is happening? Just one or two examples, or some of your kind of editorial comments on that.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I could even just, I didn't actually explain all the pictures as I was going along for the vision. I could even just tell you, because I think each of those pictures is sort of like it's a best practice example that I wanted to highlight and lift up to see how those could be expanded. So maybe that will just give you a little bit more context here. So for example, this map is from Goodlands. So Goodlands is an organization that Molly Burhans started a couple of years ago. She's a Catholic GIS mapper, and she got the Vatican's data on Catholic land holdings throughout the world to see how the land could be used for more ecological purposes. So, this picture is from her website, which I have here at the bottom. But I think that's a really cool example of using technology, and how that could be used. And that's just ecological in general. It's not specific to food, but I think it's a really cool example. This picture is from Wake Forest University School of Divinity, and I was in a fellowship there it was a Food, Health, and Ecological Wellbeing Fellowship. So that's an example of a training that I was part of. And, there's also food programs. Princeton has a farminary, I think, I don't have it there, but farminary program. Methodist Theological Seminary of Ohio also has a food program. So there's a seminary that's just starting in North Carolina, or maybe it's South Carolina, that is based on food. Like they have, instead of paying tuition, they just do farming and that pays their tuition. This is from Kendall Vanderslice's book called We Will Feast, which is a book about the dinner church movement. And I met Kendall through that fellowship program in Wake Forest University. But the dinner church program, I think, is fascinating because it goes back to the early church before like the Catholic Church, and the the institution took over the church and made the Eucharist into like, the wafer that we use. But this was like before there was a wafer, there was actual meals that were celebrated around the liturgy. And so the dinner church movement is an idea of bringing liturgy back to the meals. So this is from her book. This is from, looks like Princeton Theological Seminary. I think I mentioned they have a pharmacary program there. This is from a food capital. It's a program run by a Franciscan-hearted Catholic guy in Virginia that I met through the Franciscan Action Network. I think it's Virginia Foodshed Capital, making sure farmers have funding they need. This I mentioned is from Interfaith Public Health Network. This is a rally that we did a year or two ago, and some members, I think, from the Gambian Youth Organization. And this one, this looks like it's from Methodist Theological Seminary of Ohio, one of their food and faith gatherings. This is from the Black Church Food Security Network, which is a group out of Baltimore that is growing food on religiously owned land and partnering with Black farmers to get food into churches. And then this is from the Wake Forest University program, when we had a meal together, and it was kind of like a dinner church thing. I think we had like wine and bread that we broke at the beginning of the meal. And then this is the Food and Faith podcast, which is also connected to some people through the Wake Forest program. So those are just a couple of examples of, I think signs of hope that, all of this is possible. They're just little snippets, but they could all be expanded upon.
Donna, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to, first of all, thank you, Kelly, for that wonderful presentation. I think the word that you had used a couple times, the word mindfulness and maybe intentionality is another word, but I was thinking, I think what we're missing in life, in our society, is a little bit of slowing down and a little bit of that awe moment of when you're able to plant your own seeds, be it a little pot, be it whatever, and you see that seed grow into a tomato plant or a pear tree or whatever, and you actually pick that fruit and you savor it. There is an awe, a faith, food connection, a reverence, a connection to life. And in our society where sometimes we don't even cook, but when you take that, what you just picked, and eat it or cook it, there's a relationship. And we are a rushed society where we go through the drive-through and we don't even know what we're eating. We go to the grocery store and grab something, and our children don't even know what it is they're eating. We don't even know what we're eating, where it came from. I guess what is just coming to me is that very relational experience of eating something fresh, picking it, growing it, and how, I mean, this is not a short-term answer. It's not even an answer, but how our children, we need to, when our children are small, have them grow something and know from the dirt, the seed, and I don't know. I guess that awe moment is what, and that intentionality of when we eat, being intentional, not just, eating and multitasking or eating it. And I'm guilty of all of it. But trying to be more mindful of, I don't know. I just think that's a key thing, especially with those of us who are older, but especially when we're educating our children.
Yeah, thanks. I completely agree. I think that's why getting nutrition education into schools is so important, especially connected to the garden. Like I'm a huge advocate of seeing more schools have gardens and incorporate that, gardening curriculum into the regular school day, so that, that's what they say is like when kids are involved with growing the food, they're more likely to eat it, and everyone says, oh, kids won't eat vegetables. They will if they grow them, and so that's definitely missing. Most schools don't teach nutrition. And yeah, so I mean, otherwise it can be up to the parents, but not everyone lives in houses that they can grow food, and not everyone has a backyard where you can grow food, and it makes it more difficult. So the more that we can teach kids about this, the better. And interesting that you used the word awe too, because I was just on a webinar earlier today. It's the Planetary Health Alliance has this constellation project, which is this project to say that science alone isn't going to solve our problems. We need like arts and spirituality. So this is a group of people like thinking more deeply about planetary health. And the meditation this morning was around awe and like, where do you see awe? So yeah, I think that's so important. And I don't have too much of a green thumb, but someday I do want to get into gardening, and it's mind-boggling to me the fact that you can grow something from the earth that you can eat. It's just, to me, that's definitely a sense of awe for sure.
Thanks, Donna. Anyone else? Ellery?
Thank you so much for this talk. I wonder if you can suggest any sources for motivation for less meat, for veganism.
So yeah, I mentioned the Reducitarianism. That's a website, reducitarian.org. That website should have some information. There's one called Forks Over Knives. It's also a film. I think both of those are also films. Forks Over Knives is a film about plant-based eating, and they have a whole recipes that go along with it. I mentioned the Beans is How, that campaign from the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. I believe they have recipes. Trying to think what else. I have a Pinterest page. I have lots of recipes on my Pinterest page. Yeah, I hope those are a few examples of what you're looking for.
That's a help. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ann Beth, then Mary Gannon, then Roberta.
I'm sorry, I actually don't know where that button is to put the little yellow hand up. I never found it. I don't know. No, it just struck me when you were talking about beans, and beans are going to save the world. And I realized where I come from, that's a foreign food. We don't eat beans. Our people don't, aside from the little Boston baked beans, which are actually quite bad for you because they were full of molasses and brown sugar, and you basically have to stop eating them. I realize it's just, I don't know, this is not a question, but it's like, we don't know how to cook them. We don't know how to make them appetizing. I've learned a little bit when I moved away from home, but I was just back up there, and I went to our parish church, and there was nobody at mass, nobody at the evening Taizé prayer service that looked like they came from a bean eating culture. And I thought, wow, what a mountain that would be to get people to transition to beans that probably have never really eaten them. So when you were talking about recipes, that would be like, how do you teach people to eat beans? That really, it just sounds like a strange question, but that's actually true. I just never thought about that. Our people, it's considered like an ethnic food from, I don't know, the Mexican people or somebody, but not our people to eat beans. They don't grow them in their gardens. They don't. Interesting. Anyway, just a thought.
When you say our people, who are you thinking?
I'm from southeastern Massachusetts. That's where I just went up there, and of Northern European background. But there's still a lot of those kind of people up there. I realize when I go there, But they might be of French background, of Irish, of Polish, of a lot of different things. But we're not bean eaters. And when you put up that screen that said beans will save the world, I thought, it's not so easy. Our people just never think of beans when they think about a meal. So it was just a question. Where would you begin to introduce people to bean eating and how to prepare them in an appetizing way,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of recipes out there, like, just a black bean burger, for example, I think is a good option. I'm not here to try to like promote particular brands or anything, but I have a couple cookbooks. One of them is called Eat More Plants, which I like. And yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely recipes out there. I think that whole Beans Is How campaign probably has lots of recipes as well. And I mean, I think that's part of the hard part about this, right? Is like getting used to things that aren't part of our regular status quo and learning something new. Being willing to learn something new for the sake of health and the planet. So yeah, I mean, I think it's an opportunity for cultural sharing as well, because if we decide to have meals with people of other cultures and ethnicities, you know, we can learn from them, and we can learn some of their recipes and their ways of cooking beans, for example. So I think it's an opportunity for more, you know, what Pope Francis calls is that that encounter, you know, the culture of encounter, and having that immersion opportunity. And yeah, just meeting people from other cultures and learning how they are cooking foods too.
Okay, Mary Gannon. You're muted, Mary.
I was interested in your word reducitarianism. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Because it seems like you know so much. You presented so much. But this is a huge challenge. It affects a lot of parts of our lives, even family life. You know, I just have to tell you that, you know, like my daughter cooks plant-based, but they do the substitute, like you showed us Better Burgers or something. You know, you showed us a meat.
Oh, the Impossible Burger or something like that?
Yeah. And my question is kind of, I think about it, gosh, they're eating all that stuff that tastes like chicken, and this tastes like that, and they must be seasoning those things to taste. What is that product they're putting in to make those things taste like all these other things? Is it, and I think you said like maybe it isn't the healthiest thing in the world for you.
Yeah,
And
I mean, yeah, I finished.
well, it's just interesting. We can't have Thanksgiving dinner anymore together because unless she brings her dinner, you know, she brings that. It's I can't believe any Italian mother that serves Sunday gravy would ever buy this. You know, these are huge changes, just like Sister Anne has talked about. I'm not trying to be negative. This is a huge challenge. So I like your word reducitarianism, because I think that's kind of maybe a more realistic way to tackle a little of this. Like when you say no eggs, no dairy, you know, less eggs, less dairy, less meat, you know, like I would say, okay, I'll give up red meat, or I'll give up, but I'll have an omelet and I'll put vegetables in it. Well, then you say no eggs, you know, reduce eggs, reduce dairy. It's like, okay, what's left if you don't like beans and you don't like fish? It's hard, right? Yeah, those are just all thoughts I have.
Yeah, I was, and that word came, Brian Cateman, I think, is the one who coined it. He's the founder of the Reducitarian Foundation. And I was listening to this podcast yesterday. There's a podcast called What You're Eating, which is affiliated with the Foodprint, you know, the Foodprint website. And this episode is called The History and Future of Plant-Based Eating. And, you know, the person who was speaking on the podcast was talking about how she used to be a vegan. And then she had this like existential crisis about like realizing that, you know, why was she trying to have like, you know, cashew milk from, you know, cashews that were grown on the other side of the world. And she doesn't know like what were the, you know, how were those cashews being grown? How were the workers treated? All that sort of thing, when she could just be having milk from a local farmer who she can get to know. So she started reintroducing like dairy into her diet and everything, because she realized that being a strict vegan and, you know, considering whether something was like plant-based or not, was not necessarily having the impact that she wanted to see it have in terms of the environmental impact. So I thought that was really insightful, because but she did talk about how the years that she was a vegan really taught her how to cook foods differently in the kitchen and how to do some substitutions that people who have never been vegan don't know how to do. So I think there is a middle ground to find. And I agree. That's why I really like that term reducitarianism, because it doesn't have to be about black or white, but it is about making some changes. You know, what is the personal commitment that we're going to make to realize that this industrial food system that we've all been living in has gotten out of control, and we need to rein things back so that we can take some of that control back.
Thank you.
Roberta?
I'm Roberta. So I already go up to the. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not really Roberta. I'm Marion. And Mary, I want you to know that 2 years ago, I went to my niece's for Thanksgiving, and she's vegan, and I didn't miss the turkey at all. But I do believe that education is the key to just about everything. I was thinking of how for many, many years, I would go to fish fries all through Lent at different churches. My niece tried to get me to go to every different one. We would bless the food in the beginning, but nobody ever talked about the sacredness of the food. And that would have been a perfect opportunity to educate people. And the other thing I hear people say, oh, fresh vegetables and fruits are so expensive. Again, I think if you could have a chart, or we could make a chart and show how much it costs for beef, chicken, whatever, compared to the same kind of weights with vegetables for a particular meal. And my last thought is, I've never seen a salad bar in the last 10 years that doesn't have beans. So we're getting all different kinds of beans. That's it.
Thanks. Yeah, in regards to the sacredness of food, I agree. And I think that, you know, we say this prayer at the beginning of our meal, right? The grace. And I think that unless you're really thinking deeply about the words that we're saying and the implications, I think that it loses a lot of the meaning in terms of the food system and, you know, the implications of the food that we're eating at the moment on the workers who created that food, on in the environment that the food was created into. And I think that if we do reintroduce some of that awe around food, and like I said earlier, I think the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh does a really good job of talking about the spirituality of food. He has a little book called How to Eat, and he has like the greatest little, you know, blurbs in there, you know, explaining his thoughts around this. So yeah, I think that we do need to learn more of that. In terms of trying to think of the second part that you said, you know, we talked about, yeah, the beans. I think that there are beans from all different cultures. And sorry, I'm forgetting the middle the middle question. Maybe somebody can help me out.
Cost. I was talking.
The cost. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so I do, yeah, I agree that, you know, meat can be more expensive than plant-based eating. But if you try to make a meal out of vegetables, right? Or if you go to try to buy a salad from somewhere, it's gonna, you know, turn out to be more expensive than if you just get, you know, like a quick fast food thing. So I think it depends, right? Where are those externalities? Because if you're cooking yourself, yeah, it can be cheaper to eat more of the plant-based options. But a lot of times when we're eating, it's harder to make a meal out of things that are more affordable. It just depends on the community. But I think the subsidies chart really speaks volumes, because we only have 4% of subsidies going towards fruits and vegetables, and we expect it to be half of people's diets. So I think it's not always easier for communities, and Also, the access isn't there for low-income communities to be able to get more of that fresh food often.
See if anyone who hasn't spoken yet before we go to Mary. Anyone? Sue?
I'm just going to respond to some of the comments with Mary about the Italian cook, mother. I come from an Italian family and Thanksgiving. We never got to the turkey because there were all those layers, if you recall, right? There was the antipasta, the lasagna, the this, and that. We never got to the turkey. And to Ann's about how do we get people to do this? A couple of years ago, a neighboring church hosted a meal, and I think it was limited to 50 people, and it might have been through Catholic Relief Services, and we all had to pay $50, and we were given, according to the percentage of the population of the world of what they were eating, you either got a steak, sirloin steaks meal, or beans or rice, a cup of beans and a cup of rice. And the presentation was beautiful, and the people sitting down to the meat were not enjoying it. So as a way to present this to a large group of people, I thought that was just a fantastic idea, and it's probably still out there if you're interested in that. And then we just returned yesterday from 2 weeks on El Camino, and a group of us went, 14 of us. And I think among us, there were 2 gluten-free, 3 vegetarians, and the rest were, I hate to say carnivores, but meat eaters. So in Italy, in Portugal, in Spain, we were the minority getting the vegetarian meals. By the end, everybody wanted the vegetarian meals because they were just presented so beautifully. They were locally grown. There must be like 50 ways they make potatoes. So they were switching out from pre-ordering their meat meals to vegetarian. So I think, as we, just support one another going along, when I entertain, I do that. And it will grow because the meat industry is not going to last. It's not going to sustain much longer. So we can start looking at those recipes. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope we can make some changes. There's a lot of work to do, though, to move such an industry to turn it around. But thanks. And that's an interesting comment about the Catholic Relief Services. I've been to a hunger banquet before, which is where it's like a lottery and you either, get scraps or you get like a full meal. But that's interesting about the steak versus the beans. I hadn't heard of that one before.
Hey, anyone we haven't heard from yet? Okay, Mary.
I just wondered do you know why people in the suburbs sometimes pay less money for the same product that an urban market, a supermarket would charge less in the suburbs for the same product and charge more in the city? Like, I don't know where you live, but like somebody that lives in Jersey City or Newark might pay more than somebody that lives out here in Madison, New Jersey. I don't know where you come from, but why do supermarkets do that? Do you have any idea, or have you ever heard of that? Oh, Sister Ann, maybe.
What I saw just working in stores and stuff, the reason they do it is because the people who live in the city do not have the transportation to shop around.
Captive audience.
They're a captive audience. They can charge whatever they want. The people have to pay it because they can't get to where it would be cheaper. So that was true when I was doing greeting card vending. It's true for food. It's true for basically everything. I think it's just a question of captive audience. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's also like supply and demand, because there's more demand for those foods maybe in the city if there's more concentrated group of people in one area, so they can increase the prices. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I mean, another thing to keep in mind too, I mean, maybe that's comparing supermarkets. But I referred to earlier when I was talking about the buy-in groups, you know, that's a big issue I've been working on for a long time in the Bronx, is that the bodegas, you know, they can't sell foods at more affordable prices because, I mean, they can't buy foods in bulk the same way that supermarkets can because they don't have the place to store it, right? They can't get like, gallons and gallons or something, or, baskets and baskets, because they just don't have a place to store it. Because if they could buy in bulk, then they would be able to reduce the prices of those items. But since they can't do that, unless they were to do like a group purchasing thing that we're trying to do through this bodega and small business group, like a trade association, to be able to buy in bulk for many bodegas at the same time. But we don't have that set up yet. So sometimes the bodegas also have to, charge higher prices because they can't get the discounts that the larger stores can.
Maybe one more comment or question. Any of the dark squares want to show their faces? There's one. Holly? You're muted, Holly.
Hi. I was in a busier space, and so I thought I would be very distracting, but now I'm out here. But this was great. I so appreciate being able to pop in.
Thanks for joining.
We're glad to see your face. No question or comment though?
No, it was a lot of good information, and I'm a bean eating vegetarian, so I I have lots of good cookbooks, but I think it's just lots of good information and a lot of hard work, and it's just inspiring and hopeful to hear people wrangling with it. So I appreciate it very much.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope I didn't, squeeze too much in, but I knew I had to keep my comments organized, otherwise I would have been rambling. So I had to write it out. But
yeah, I think that a key is what Donna mentioned about deciding in your life you're going to slow down and make time for cooking and make time for food preparation, which we generally don't. A number of us here went for a number of years to a retreat day every spring to Genesis Farm, and we always had a vegan meal. And I don't think there wouldn't be anybody who thought they were deprived after having eaten that meal. They were fabulous. But fortunately, we had a cook who was, while we were having our retreat, was in the kitchen making all this stuff. So it's a serious decision about lifestyle changes. And as Kelly said so well with that reductionism idea, that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Going from eating a big hunk of beef to using, a little ground beef in a vegetable dish to give flavoring is delicious, and it's a significant change. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So thanks to all of you for this, especially to Kelly for this fabulous presentation. I'm going to listen to this again. And again, please do send me your slides, and I will distribute the slides when I send around the recording as well. So thanks to you all, and we hope to see you again on November 6th. We've already gotten an appetizer of Mary McCann's thought, so we'll see her in the flesh on November 6th. So thanks to you all, and have a good night.
Thank you, Terry.
thank you all.
Goodbye. You're welcome.